Good morning, Coalition. It's great to see everybody today on a somewhat dreary Friday, the 7th of May. But we're going to pick your life up a bit here. We got a great interview with Bebe Smith coming up in a minute. But first of all, we would encourage you, as you've already started doing, put your name and your organization in the chat. And then we're going to ask Allison to give us an update.
Hello, everyone. Good morning and happy Friday. I just have a few brief announcements that you can also find in your email. One thing that I would like to draw your attention to is just some calendar reminders. Next Friday, we do have Friday Facts. That'll be Jeff Bigpen from the Guilford County Register of Deeds. But on the coalition meeting, which is May 21st, we will not have Friday Facts. On May 28th, we will also not have Friday Facts due to the holiday weekend. That information can be found on the calendar and in your email, just as a reminder. We are also not having a clinical practice forum this month. That is also canceled due to the holiday weekend, but the next clinical practice forum will resume in June. Another update that I would like to bring to your attention is the AARP event today. You'll hear from representatives from the NC legislature and advocacy leaders about the needs of the North Carolina's growing aging population. That is at 10:30 this morning. I will put the link to that in the chat, and Steve Hahn can do that as well. So tune in for that great event. And then the last update that I have for you just went out this morning. It is an update regarding the ACP bill. Please refer to your email to see that. But the bill passed through the Senate, as you just heard, 49-0. So more information about that update can be found in your email as of this morning and will be available on the website. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Allison. That's good information. And I'm going to just make one final announcement. You all remember Brian Wood, who was our interim administrator and community research assistant, and now is in his second year at UNC Medical School. Brian texted us this morning and he received an award, the John B. Graham Research Society Award for Clinical Science. So, and Brian said he got this as an oral presentation, and he attributed his oral presentation skills to having worked with us for the year and being required to give oral presentations on the Mind My Health program. So,
and advanced directives say they live forever.
We appreciate that. So congratulations to Brian. I don't think he'll be able to join us this morning, but anyway. So quickly to Bebe Smith, wonderful interview that we're going to have here with Bebe, and Bebe's fairly new to the coalition, but so welcome, Bebe.
Thank you.
She works with the regional AHEC here in North Carolina, and but we're going to go back a ways with Bebe and talk about her youth in Birmingham, Alabama. So tell us a little bit about what you did when you were growing up and your interests, please.
Okay, and I will say I'm a clinical social worker, so the growing up in Birmingham, Alabama is a little bit relevant to that. So I am from Birmingham. My father was an Episcopal priest, and he, for a number of years, worked at the University of Alabama in Birmingham. He was a chaplain at the medical center there, and in his work as a chaplain, he wasn't a clinical chaplain. He worked with the medical students and the faculty, and he taught medical ethics, and he was interested in learning about health systems. And he was somewhat involved in the civil rights movement. He did human relations work in Birmingham, and it's been interesting. I have found some of his sermons recently from the 1960s at some pivotal times in Alabama, and he was known for speaking up and speaking out. And he did that all through his life. Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So you had a chance at a young age to travel with your father to, and I suspect the whole family, to England. Tell us about that experience.
Yeah.
please.
So in 1973, when I was 10 years old, my father had a sabbatical to go to London for 9 months to study the National Health Service and to bring back ideas about healthcare to Alabama. And one of the things that, so that was a fantastic year. I was at the right age. There were 4 kids in the family, and I was the youngest. My oldest sister was 16, and she did not have so much fun being with that disruption, but I was just at the right age to go to a city like London and have that kind of adventure. But one of the things that my father learned about when he was in London was he learned about hospice. So this was back in 1973, and he was able to take what he didn't. Unfortunately, he didn't bring a national health system back to the US. But he did, he was one of the founders of hospice in Charleston, South Carolina. I think that was probably in the 1980s. So yeah, I'm very happy to connect with this group, kind of having that sort of in my background, and recognizing that some of my work must have had some roots from my father. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. So you ended up living in Charleston.
Yes, for a brief time. I didn't spend a whole lot of time in Charleston, but yeah, I was 15 when we moved there. Mhm.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
But in your youth, you also got involved in music. So tell us about what music.
Yeah. Yeah. So music was a big part of both my high school and college experience, and just particularly in high school, playing guitar and singing with friends. We did quite a lot of that, and a lot of our sort of social get-togethers. I will say that when I did live in Charleston, when I was 15 and 16, I used to play in bars. And with a friend of mine, we kind of did two young women, very young women, singing and in harmony and playing guitars, and we hit some of the bars in Charleston and did that for a little while. And then that continued in college with the college coffee house circuit, where I went to school in New York.
And you had the opportunity to do a thing called rock roulette.
Yeah, so I took probably a 25-year hiatus from music, just as I got into my professional life and being a mom and all of that. But in 2019, I took a leap, and in Durham, I live in Durham, and in Durham, there's a group called Girls Rock NC, and they're mostly focused on having girls go to band camp and learn how to play rock instruments and learn how to be in a band. But they had something for adult women, and it's called Rock Roulette, and you just join Rock Roulette, and then you get randomly assigned with other women to create a band. So I matched up with 4 other women, and we had 6 weeks to form a band, come up with a name, do a little promotion, and then we performed in a show at Motorco in Durham, 3 songs, 2 originals and 1 cover. So that was my first sort of real venture into rock and roll. And I played guitar and was the lead vocalist for our band Moon Rocks. And so Moon Rocks just had 1 show, but it was fantastic. And we had 2 original songs. 2 of the women in our band were great songwriters. And then our cover song was Time Warp, if you remember the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And we even had dancers on stage with us for that song, and that was a real crowd pleaser. So, and then after, so that was fun with Moon Rocks. And then after that, we created another band with another configuration of women, and that band was called Cluster Sparkle. And we had some shows in 2019, and we had big plans for 2020, but unfortunately, the pandemic hit, and I think Cluster Sparkle is now on hiatus. But yeah.
So had it not been for the pandemic, we might have been reading about Bebe Smith and Company and Cluster Sparkle in Rolling Stone rather than.
Yeah, I mean, we were sort of on that trajectory, and things happen. But I will say one of my bandmates in Cluster Sparkle, who was our main songwriter, she has just dropped an EP this morning. And for those of you who are interested, particularly she is in her 60s. So it's never too late for older folks to become rock and rollers. So if you want to look on Bandcamp for Blue Horse Project, it's some fantastic music there, and all of the proceeds from selling that album will go to support Honor the Earth. So
Okay.
yeah, so just a little shout out for that too. But yeah, it's been really nice to kind of get back in touch with some of my creative pursuits over the last few years and sort of remembering those aspects of who I am.
So one thing you have to learn is if you're on Friday Facts, you're going to get asked all kinds of questions about your background. So that's
Okay.
great. Thank you for sharing that, Bebe. So
Sure.
let's go back to you got your bachelor's degree in English.
Yes.
And where was that?
So I went to Vassar College in New York,
Mm-hmm.
and I was an English major. I kind of was in college at that time where you could just read a lot of books and do a lot of writing. So I was lucky to be able to do that. And I didn't even think about what I wanted to do in the working world when I went to college, but I think I wanted to work in either book publishing or I wanted to work for a record company when I got out of college. Yeah.
Interesting. But then you went on and got an MSW and began to work in psychiatry.
Yes. So I several years after I got out of undergrad, I moved to North Carolina to go to graduate school at the UNC School of Social Work. And I had sort of had a shift. That's actually what drew me to social work. I got laid off from a job. I worked for a publishing company and I was working on gardening books. And that was a great, fun job. And it was great. But the company lost a contract and I was the second person laid off. And so it gave me a time to sort of rethink, what do I want to do with my working life? And I kind of went back to what my values were, what was important to me. And I was very interested in doing something that was in service and sort of supported the values that I had around social justice. And I sort of those go back to, my upbringing as a preacher's kid in Alabama. So I came upon social work. And it's interesting because I did not think that I would do clinical work as a social worker, but I ended up getting very involved in the mental health aspects.
And one of the areas that is particularly relevant to what we're talking about here in the Serious Illness Coalition is that you've been very involved in psychiatric advanced care planning. So tell us about that a bit.
Yeah. So I'm currently working at Southern Regional AHEC, and hopefully we're in Fayetteville. Southern Regional AHEC is affiliated with Duke, and for the past 4 years, I've been working on a project to promote the use of psychiatric advance directives. And we are doing that in collaboration with colleagues at Duke, including Marvin Swartz, who's a psychiatrist, and he and his research team have been trying to promote psychiatric advance directives through doing research on them and other implementation projects, really for probably 25 years now. And as you know, sometimes these kinds of changes are slow.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit more about, because I don't know that everybody appreciates what psychiatric or mental health advanced directives will do for somebody.
Yeah. And if I back up a little bit, I'll tell you, so my clinical interest in graduate school, I got interested in working with people with schizophrenia specifically. I worked with a professor whose research area was that, and I had a field placement at a clubhouse model program in Carborough called Club Nova. So I got interested kind of in the academic sort of study of schizophrenia, but also the practical of working directly with people who lived with psychotic disorders or other serious mental illnesses. So that's kind of where my clinical interest was rooted in that. But the idea of a psychiatric advance directive, particularly for people who have had the experience of a psychiatric hospitalization, is it gives people the chance to plan in advance. And that's not new to anyone listening into this. It also empowers people. It's, sort of rooted in self-determination principles. So what people can do with a psychiatric advance directive, which is also, it's called a mental health advance instruction, and the statutes in North Carolina, is sort of consent to treatment in advance of a crisis, and also state their preferences for treatment, both in terms of medications that they might want to be treated with or not treated with, a preference for a facility to be hospitalized in, and other instructions about sort of their symptoms, who they might want to be involved in their care if they're hospitalized. So that's kind of, it's similar principles to other advanced care planning.
But it does move the time situation up a bit, so it's not just about end of life, as you've
Right.
indicated.
Yeah. So it's really about planning for what happens in a mental health crisis. And if you think about a very serious illness like schizophrenia, if a person has periodic psychotic episodes, they might have periods of wellness where they are completely in their right minds and can plan in advance for what might happen. But in a period of psychosis or a period of mania or even severe depression, they may lose capacity for decision making. So the idea is that it is advanced kind of planning, but it's sort of thinking, okay, if I get into this state of mind in the future, here is what I would want to happen in my treatment. A lot of it sort of is a response to many people have had experience with involuntary treatment in the psychiatric systems. So this was a way to sort of say, I'd like to have more control over what happens to me, and I'd like to have some say, and perhaps avoid some of the trauma or the negative things that had happened in a past involuntary treatment.
And you've indicated that Alzheimer's, dementia, and those kinds of diseases can also be very relevant to this kind of an advanced instruction.
Yes, and while the work we've done around promoting psychiatric advance directives, it's mostly been focused on people with serious mental illness. But if we think broadly about what gets included as a psychiatric disorder, dementia, there are other kinds of disorders that would affect a person's capacity for decision making. And I think it fits well. Dementia planning would fit well in the same kind of principles. I don't know that I have seen a whole lot around advanced care planning for dementia, although I did come across an article in the New York Times a few years ago. There was a physician who had developed a form and had a website around dementia care planning. There may be some people on today who know more about that, but it seems that those are kind of relevant principles. And particularly when we think about some illnesses like schizophrenia, we think about people having episodes of losing capacity, but then restoring capacity. So that might be different for an illness that may progress. But there's still those principles of like thinking about what you might want to happen in your care.
Exactly. Catherine's got a question.
So maybe, we have a lot of stereotypes and thoughts about schizophrenia and other major mental illnesses that would make us be really uncomfortable with how do you start talking about this and who is the right candidate for it? How do we move something like this into mainstream in a way where people start to embrace self-determination, if you will?
Yes, yeah. Well, there is a very much a first step, and that is sort of seeing people who live with these very severe mental illnesses as human beings, and seeing them as fully human as all of us are. Also, I think there's so much that we don't know, and we get afraid of what we don't know. Mm-hmm. So I think there's some sort of broad awareness campaigns of the human experience of more serious kinds of mental disorders, or an experience, the humanness of psychosis might be something as well. I used to use a statistic that 1 in 100 people would experience schizophrenia in their lifetime. That's shifted a little bit. And now what we know from research is that 1 in 50 people will experience psychosis. So psychosis as a symptom, like anxiety or depression. So that's 1 in 50, and that it can be a part of many different things. It can be a reaction to medications. It can be intoxication. It can be a trauma response. And it can be part of something like a more serious disorder like schizophrenia that's more long lasting. So what we know now is that psychosis is pretty common, and it's part of just what happens. Anyone under really high stress might experience psychosis, but a disorder like schizophrenia is something more. And includes some other things that go along with it, and is not always, if someone's experiencing psychosis, it's not always schizophrenia. It's also pretty common in bipolar disorder and in mania, and sometimes depression, postpartum depression, all of these things, psychosis might be a part of.
So how do we bring the mental health community into the mainstream with other medical care in a way that you don't lose the focus of really needing to focus on that person, but at the same time, we normalize the fact that 1 in 50 will have psychosis sometime, and we need to be prepared.
Yeah, I think that it's important to, we hear so much talk about integrated care now, our mental health system has been sort of carved out and separate from our general healthcare system. And I think you even mentioned, your past experience in the 1970s working at Dorothea Dix Hospital, which was like the state hospitals were all inclusive. People got their medical care there. Right, as an addition to their mental health treatment. So they were all inclusive hospitals, but they were segregated for a certain population, and of all kinds of perhaps brain disorders were treated in those state hospitals. But so if we really bring in mental health, which is so broad, but also look at how do we sort of take care of the whole person and have a real integrated focus, but also integrate mental health into what we offer more broadly in our health systems. So there's a lot of work we need to do. I think that some countries are a little more advanced than we are in the US on this.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that goes without saying almost.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of questions and opportunities here in the chat. Number one, Keith Starwalt at Wake Forest Baptist said, would you consider having a module for us around advanced instruction for mental health? So that's something for you to consider. I think we could have more around this, because this is an area that really is very relevant. We've got folks from the Coalition on Aging here. We've got Karen Appert, who we've met through the dementia care program in Wake Forest, who is with the caregiving working group and so forth, and other folks who are very involved. Mary Lou Infinito, who at Biden,
hey, Mary Lou.
Asking a question about whether you would help with a project that they're doing in Fayetteville. So I'll leave that between the two of you. But Ann Elmore from the Secretary of State's office has been with us in the Institute of Medicine Task Force on Serious Illness, and then has rejoined us now with the coalition. She says, thank you for speaking on this issue, Bebe. Please talk about using the advanced instructions regarding treatment regimens that might be usual and customary, but to which the individual had a bad reaction.
Yeah. And that's, I will say that despite all of our efforts to promote psychiatric advance directives, they're not used that much in practice. We do hope that they will be used more in practice, but that's a really important issue. I think oftentimes when someone comes into an emergency room in a agitated state, psychiatric crisis, I think there's a pretty standard medications that are used to treat that. And sometimes those medications are contraindicated. An example might be someone who has a paradoxical reaction to a benzodiazepine. And instead of that calming them, it agitates them. So that would be exactly the kind of information to put in an advance directive, to say, this medication, I had this kind of reaction. Don't treat me with this, this is something that I respond better to. The same for, something that I see frequently is that people don't want to be treated with Haldol. I think a lot of people that I've known over the years who have had, maybe 30 or 40 years of treatment in psychiatric systems have had very bad experiences with higher doses of Haldol. And they've had, akathisia or other kinds of very serious physical reactions to the drug. But I know that's something that's used frequently in psychiatric emergency settings for agitation. Now, I'm not a physician, and I'm not a psychiatrist, so I don't want to be the one sort of talking specifically about medications, but it is a very important issue. And that is the other piece that can happen is that a person who's in the midst of psychosis maybe can't communicate at all about their history. So if you have the document, then it's sort of like, oh, okay, here's what this person was treated with in the past. This is what helped in the past. This is what we need to know about their diagnosis and symptomatology and the kinds of things that have gone on in their past treatment. Because sometimes a person will show up, can't communicate to the emergency room doctors, but there's someone out there who knows them very well, knows what works for their treatment, has a good therapeutic alliance with them, all of that. But so that's the sort of practical information too around communication and better communication with community-based providers, with emergency room personnel or inpatient treatment providers, because that's a piece too, that these can just be practical communication tools. They can also help families a huge amount, because what can happen with families and dealing with a psychiatric emergency can be, really tear them apart. But if you sit down and have the plan, that can help.
And I think about the rationality of who's the family decision maker in that moment too, can be very, very different depending on how that person's coping with the mentally ill person.
Yes.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
we have people that are experiencing that every day. So that's an excellent point. Catherine has to go to another meeting right now, but in our last minute, give us an update about what AHEC means to you, Bebe,
Okay.
and how your activities go on.
Yes, so I am very pleased to work with Southern Regional AHEC. We're down in Fayetteville and we serve those southern counties. I'm based in Durham. I do a lot of things virtually. I was doing that for the past 4 years, but I think the mission of training the workforce to improve the overall health of all the citizens of North Carolina, that mission has always resonated with me. I did see some requests for training and those sorts of things. That's what I do. That's my full-time job right now. I mostly do the training on psychiatric advanced directives, general introductions, and here's what your basics about what you need to know, and then a fuller facilitation training. And we had a nice partnership with Vidant in terms of training a bunch of folks there, and then we did a train the trainer. So it's really trying to advance this whole thing, but it fits well with AHEC. And then I do some other trainings as well around psychotic disorders and social determinants of health as well.
Well, that is really key, and we're going to follow up with you if you don't mind, Bebe, because I think we've got a lot of interest in the potential of doing something more in line with that and for the future. So.
Yeah.
Keith, Mary Lou, and company, keep talking to us, and
yes.
We'll line something up with Bebe. So thank you very much.
It's been great to connect.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right, we're at the top of the hour, so I promised everybody that we will stop at 9. But thank you so much. It's great to have you with us, Bebe. And Catherine's going to jump back for 1 second.
Just to say thank you.
Yeah, it's thanks for, I'm so pleased to be connected to the coalition now, and I look forward to further conversation.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having me today.
Y'all have a wonderful weekend.
All right.